Welcome to Echoes of the Lost Audiobook, where forgotten stories come to life. Dive into worlds of mystery, survival, and the unknown. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest audiobooks. Chap 41, Gateway to the Gas Forge. Ryder pressed forward through the cracked gray expanse, his hands gripping the tattered fabric of his bag like a sailor clutching ropes in an unrelenting storm of ash and dust. The sky above hung heavy with thick black clouds, swirling like a leaden shroud, allowing only faint, pale beams of light to pierce through, illuminating the scattered, broken metal pillars strewn across the land. These pillars stood silent, twisted and rusted, like the skeletal remains of a world long incinerated, now reduced to a wasteland of dry, ash-covered ruins. The wind howled through the jagged wreckage, carrying hot gusts from tiny fissures in the ground, filling the air with a sharp, sulphurous stench that stung his throat with every breath, mingling with fine dust that coated his skin and clothes in a gritty, gray film. Lena stayed close at his side, her long steel rod gripped tightly in her right hand, her keen eyes slicing through the desolate haze ahead, her breathing slow and deliberate, adapting to the increasingly heavy, toxic air. Torin shuffled behind, one arm supporting Mira, the frail young girl leaning heavily against her father's shoulder, her other hand clutching the dust-stained cloth over her nose, her breaths growing weaker, punctuated by dry, rasping coughs. Kalia brought up the rear, her left hand clutching a broken wooden stick as a makeshift weapon, her tense gaze fixed on the shadowy shape looming ahead, a low metallic structure venting faint white smoke from a small stack, flickering like a mirage through the thick dust. The control point lay just 100 meters away, but that distance stretched like a lifeless ocean, where every step was a battle for survival in the apocalyptic wasteland of Archive. He slipped the Seraphim device from his bag, a small, cold metal object, its red light blinking feebly like the pulse of a dying creature. The scratched, gray screen flickered to life, displaying a terse, chilling message: Archive, Ryder, Control Point 100 meters. Enter. The words echoed in his mind, not just a command, but a whisper from a distant, authoritative force, cold and unnerving. He opened his small notebook, its pages creased and yellowed from dust and time, his fingers brushing the rough surface as he wrote slowly with a stubby pencil, Day 26 North, 100 meters. Archive Phase 4, Control Point a gas forge. Enter to survive. He paused, his dark brown eyes locked on the device's screen, a wave of unease surging through his chest like a hidden tide. 100 meters, he muttered, his low, hoarse voice blending with the shrieking wind and dust, but this air'll kill us before we make it. He looked up, peering toward the gas forge, its silhouette sharpening slightly through the haze, a squat, angular block of metal, low to the ground, with thin pipes snaking along its sides, venting a murky white smoke tinged with faint green, like the breath of a living machine. Lena stepped up beside him, her eyes glinting in the dim, dead light of the sky, a small, defiant flame struggling to burn amid the storm of ash and poison. "You see an entry yet?" she asked, her voice rough and strained, her breath trembling slightly from the searing air in her lungs. She raised her left hand, pointing toward the forge, where a faint outline of a metal door emerged through the dust, tucked low at the structure's base, nearly obscured by rusted pipes and the thick, swirling smoke. "Gas is pouring out harder there, how do we get through that?" She took a short breath, wincing as the heavy sulfur stench stung her eyes, tears welling up involuntarily and streaking down her dust-caked cheeks. Ryder nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the metal door from a distance, trying to analyze it through the dense curtain of dust and toxic gas. He knelt, pressing his right hand to the ground, feeling the warm gusts rising from the small cracks in the dry, gray soil, faint tremors pulsing through his palm like the heartbeat of a massive machine buried deep below. "This isn't just a reactor," he said, his voice low but firm, it's a gas processor. They're pumping chemicals into the ground, maybe to test it or sustain something. He took a shallow breath through the cloth over his nose, dulling the burning sting in his throat, then continued his analysis. The gas is mostly sulfur dioxide, but there's steam and a hint of nitrates, smells like chemical residue from combustion. If we get inside, there has to be a filtration system, or at least air less deadly than out here. He picked up his notebook, jotting another long line, his hand trembling slightly from the strange mix of cold and heat in the land. Gas forge, sulfur dioxide plus nitrates, filtration inside? Control point 100M, low entry. He turned to the group, his voice low but clear over the wind's howl. Closer to the forge, the gas gets thicker, cover your noses tight, stay low to dodge the main flow. We have to get inside, there's no other way. Torin propped Mira against a nearby broken metal pillar, his cloudy eyes brimming with deep worry as he watched his daughter cough in ragged bursts, each sound tearing through the silence of the dead land. Mira won't last much longer, he said, his voice slow and shaky, his thin hands gripping her shoulders tightly. This gas burns my lungs. Imagine what it's doing to her. Mira slumped forward, her small hands clutching the crude filter Ryder had made in the previous chapter, her breathing faint and uneven, her eyes red and watering from the gas and dust. I can keep going, she whispered, her voice barely a breeze, but her gaze flickered with a stubborn resilience, refusing to weigh the group down. Kalia stepped up beside Ryder, her eyes narrowing as she peered at the gas forge, her right hand gripping the broken wooden stick, her left brushing her nose to gauge the airflow. It's hotter closer in, she said, her voice soft but distinct, laced with tension. Gas is blasting straight from that door, how do we cross without choking? She took a quick breath, grimacing as the thick sulfur stench hit her, triggering a faint cough, her hand tightening on the stick like an anchor. Ryder turned to face the group, his gaze sweeping over each of them, Lena's fierce determination, Torin's protective fear, Myra's fragile strength, Kalia's quiet vigilance. He drew a deep breath through his nose cloth, his chest searing from the gas, but he forced himself to stay calm and think. The door's low, hot gas rises, if we crouch and crawl through, we'll miss most of the main blast, he said, his voice steady despite the strain. But inside could be worse, machines, or something the Seraphim left behind. We need to be ready. He rummaged through his bag, checking the crude filter he'd made for Mira, then glanced at the forge, noting the white smoke from the stack thickening, tinged with faint green, a sign the machine within was ramping up. He added to his notebook, smoke denser, activity spiking, Seraphim remote control. Suddenly, the Seraphim device in his hand buzzed faintly, its red light flashing faster, and a crackling sound erupted from the tiny speaker, not the lifeless static of before, but a deep, cold voice with a human timbre. Ryder, enter. The control point demands life. Time is running out. The voice cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence amid the wind and heat. Ryder froze, his eyes widening, his chest tightening as he realized this wasn't an AI, it was a person, a human behind the Seraphim, revealing themselves for the first time through the device. He scribbled quickly, his hand shaking, human voice, Seraphim not machines? Who's commanding? He turned to Lena, his voice taut, you hear that? Not a machine, a person. Lena's grip on her steel rod tightened, her eyes flashing with a mix of shock and anger. A person, she echoed, her voice dropping low, edged with suspicion. Where are they? How do they know we're here? She glared toward the forge, as if trying to pierce the dust and find the speaker, her right hand clenching the rod harder, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. Torin looked up, his cloudy eyes flickering with confusion. Other survivors? He asked, his voice slow, but then he shook his head. No, they're giving orders. They're in charge. He pulled Mira closer, as if the voice might steal her away. Kalia frowned, her gaze fixed on the device in Ryder's hand. They want us alive, or just test subjects? She asked, her voice soft but sharp, her grip on the wooden stick tightening as if bracing for something worse. Ryder didn't answer immediately, his eyes returning to the gas forge, now less than 100 meters away, its squat, rusted form growing clearer through the dust, a square metal block with a low door at its base, white smoke pouring thickly from small vents. Doesn't matter who they are, he said, his voice low but blazing with resolve. They want us inside, that's our only way to live and find the truth. He checked the device one last time, the screen still reading, control point 100 meters. Enter. He took a deep breath, the burning sensation spreading through his chest, then faced the group. Stay low, crawl through the door, we're going in. Ready? Lena nodded, her eyes flaring like a flame. Ready. Let's go. Torin helped Mira up, his voice trembling but firm, we're with you. Kalia dipped her head, her hand steady on the stick, her eyes never leaving the forge. Ryder led the way, crouching low, moving fast across the gray land, hot gas blasting his face, dust coating his clothes. The forge's door loomed ahead, thick white smoke spilling from its edges, heavy with sulfur. He dropped to his knees, pressing a hand to the cold metal rim, feeling the vibrations from within, a living machine, waiting. Here we go, he said, his voice low, then crawled through, the darkness inside swallowing him, the group following, the truth buried deep in the gas forge of the dead land. Chap 42, Tools in the Dark. Ryder crawled through the low metal door of the gas forge, his hands pressing hard against the cold, smooth floor, vibrations from deep within the structure pulsing through his palms like the heartbeat of a massive, living machine. Darkness swallowed him as he crossed the threshold, broken only by the faint glow of white smoke seeping from cracks in the walls, carrying a pungent mix of sulfur and burnt metal that scorched his chest with every breath. Outside, the gray, cracked land still wailed in the dust wind, but here, the enclosed space of the forge felt heavier, like an iron cage holding the remnants of an apocalyptic world turned into the Seraphim's deadly laboratory. Lena crawled in right behind him, her steel rod tapping the floor with a soft clang that echoed in the stillness, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows, alert as a blade seeking danger. Torin followed, guiding Mira through, the young girl gasping for air, her hand clutching the crude filter over her nose, each breath a faint wheeze, while Kalia brought up the rear, her broken wooden stick scraping the floor, her tense gaze fixed on the metal pipes lining the ceiling, where white smoke vented in steady bursts. They'd reached the control point of Archive, but the air inside wasn't salvation, it was a new test, demanding sharper wits and faster moves than ever. He knelt on one knee, pulling the Seraphim device from his bag, its feeble red light blinking like the pulse of a fading life. The scratched, gray screen lit up, showing a curt message, Archive, Ryder, control point reached. Find the life source. The words reverberated in his mind, cold and emotionless, like orders from a distant overseer watching lab rats struggle in a maze. He opened his small notebook, its pages crumpled and gray with dust, his fingers brushing the rough surface as he wrote slowly with a broken pencil, Day 27 North, inside gas forge. Archive Phase 4, Control Point, where's the life source? He paused, his dark brown eyes narrowing in the gloom, adjusting to the dim light from the white smoke, unease rising like a toxic current in his chest. Life source, he muttered, his low, hoarse voice blending with the steady hiss of the pipes overhead, but this place is a furnace, what are they expecting us to find? He looked up, taking in the vast interior of the forge, a square metal chamber, its walls coated in rust and broken panels, dominated by a large, low machine in the center, its body crisscrossed with thin pipes venting murky white smoke from every seam. A deep thrum echoed from the machine, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a giant beast in slumber, but Ryder knew better. It wasn't asleep, it was active, and they were intruders. Lena rose beside him, staying low to avoid the hot gas from the ceiling, her steel rod upright like a staff, her keen eyes sweeping the room. "You see that?" she asked, her voice rough with strain but steady, pointing to the left corner where a cluster of thin pipes descended from the ceiling, connecting to a low, rusted metal tank beside a pile of scrap, broken metal rods, charred wires, and shards of black plastic. "Something's over there, like a tank, but less gas is coming from it." She took a short breath through her nose cloth, wincing as the sulfur still hit, though fainter than at the door. Ryder nodded, moving slowly toward the tank, his worn boots scraping the floor with a faint squeak in the quiet. He knelt beside it, pressing his hand to its cold surface, feeling a subtle cool breeze leaking from a small crack in the lid, not the hot gas from above, but something different, closer to cleaner air. "This might be it," he said, his voice low but firm, his fingers tracing the lid for a way to open it. Cool air, could be a filtration system, or an oxygen reserve they left. He inhaled lightly through the crack, noting the sulfur scent fading, replaced by a faint dampness, like clean steam. Not pure, but better than out there. He wrote slowly in his notebook, "Metal tank, cool air, life source. Filtration in forge." He turned to the group, his voice clear, "Over here, this tank's air is less toxic. We can breathe for now." Torin guided Mira over, his cloudy eyes flickering with faint hope at Ryder's words. "Mira needs it," he said, his voice slow but urgent, easing her down near the tank, positioning her crude filter near the crack. Mira took a long, slow breath, the wheezing in her throat easing, her red-rimmed eyes closing slightly as she regained strength. "Better," she whispered, her voice faint but clearer, her hand gripping the cloth, a grateful glance at Ryder. Kalia knelt beside Ryder, her eyes locked on the scrap pile near the tank, her right hand clutching her broken stick, ready for anything. "If there's clean air, why'd they make it this easy?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp, her gaze shifting to the central machine, where white smoke still vented steadily. "This feels like a trap, that thing hasn't stopped." She pointed at the machine, noting its thrum growing louder, a faint tremor rippling through the floor. Ryder frowned, turning to the machine, his eyes narrowing as he traced the pipes running from it across the room, linking to the tank beside them. "It's not easy," he said, his voice low, standing and stepping toward the machine, his hand brushing a broken metal rod in the scrap pile. "This controls the gas, pumps sulfur outside but keeps the clean source in the tank. Break it, and we might lose both." He picked up the rod, a half-meter length of rusted but solid metal, then rummaged his bag for old cloth strips and grabbed a sharp black plastic shard from the pile. "We need something to defend, or break it if we have to." He started crafting, tying the plastic shard to the rod's end with the cloth, forming a crude spear with a jagged tip, strong enough to stab or pry something thin. "Use this if the machine ramps up, or if something else is here." He scribbled fast, "Crude spear, metal plus plastic, defense/break machine." Lena took the spear from Ryder, testing its weight, her eyes flashing with approval. "Good," she said, her voice low, gripping the haft tight. "If the Seraphim keep this running, we can smash it, but what about the clean air?" She glanced back at the tank, her gaze tense but resolute. Suddenly, the Seraphim device in Ryder's bag buzzed, its red light flashing rapidly, and the cold, deep voice crackled through the tiny speaker again, "Ryder, the life source is your reward. Protect it, or lose everything. The voice cut off, leaving the machine's thrum louder, as if responding to their presence. Ryder clutched the device, his eyes widening, his chest tightening as the human tone hit again, not a machine, but a real controller. He wrote quickly, human voice again, protect life source. They're watching. He turned to the group, his voice taut, they know we're here, this isn't autonomous. Get ready, we have to hold this tank. Torin pulled Mira closer to the tank, his voice trembling, what do they want from us? Kalia stood, her wooden spear in hand, her eyes fixed on the machine. They're testing us, she said, her voice soft. Ryder eyed the machine, the spear in Lena's hand, and the tank of clean air, a fragile lifeline in the dark forge, where the Seraphim watched their every move. Chap 43, whispers from the machine. Ryder stood in the dim heart of the gas forge, his hands gripping the edge of his small notebook, the cold metal floor's vibrations pulsing through his worn boots like the steady beat of an iron heart. Faint light from murky white smoke seeped through cracks in the walls and ceiling, casting a glow on the central machine, a squat, rusted metal block crisscrossed with thin pipes, venting thick bursts of sulfur-heavy smoke laced with burnt metal, weighing the air with a stifling, oppressive heat. Lena stood beside him, her crude spear from the last chapter clutched in her right hand, her sharp eyes scanning the room, tense but ready for any threat. Torin sat near the metal tank of clean air, one arm supporting Mira, the young girl breathing slowly through her crude filter pressed to the tank's crack, her breaths faint but steadier, her red-rimmed eyes half-closed as she conserved strength. Kalia knelt by the scrap pile near the tank, her broken wooden stick in her left hand, her gaze locked on the central machine, its low thrum growing louder, the floor trembling harder beneath them, as if it were waking to their presence. This was the control point of Archive, a lethal lab crafted by the Seraphim, where the life source, the tank of clean air, was a fragile reward amid darkness and poison, but also a trap they had to defend. He pulled the Seraphim device from his bag, its red light blinking faintly on the cold metal surface, the small screen displaying a terse message, Archive, Ryder, protect the life source. Time is limited. The words echoed in his mind, cold and detached, but now layered with new weight after hearing a human voice twice through the speaker, not an AI, but a real controller, a person behind the Seraphim, watching them. He opened his notebook, its pages crumpled and gray, his fingers brushing the rough surface as he wrote slowly, Day 28 North, inside gas forge. Archive Phase 4, Protect Tank, whose test? He paused, his dark brown eyes narrowing in the gloom, staring at the central machine, unease rising like a toxic draft through the cracks. Time is limited, he muttered, his low, hoarse voice blending with the machine's steady thrum. What do they want us to do with this thing? He stepped slowly toward the machine, his left hand brushing a rusted pipe, feeling the hot gas venting from a small seam, his eyes tracing the broken panels on its body, searching for signs of function or weakness. Lena moved up beside him, her spear upright, its jagged plastic tip aimed at the machine like she'd stab it any second. You hear that? She asked, her voice rough with strain but firm, edged with tension. It's getting louder, like it knows we're here. She took a short breath through her nose cloth, wincing as a hot gust from the pipe hit her face, stinging her eyes, but her gaze stayed fixed on the machine, as if facing a living foe. Ryder nodded, crouching beside the machine, pressing his hand to the floor near its base, feeling the vibrations intensify, steady and rhythmic, like a giant's breath. It's not just running, he said, his voice low but certain, it's reacting, maybe sensors, or remote control. He inhaled lightly through his cloth, analyzing the gas from the seam, thick sulfur, now mixed with burnt metal and steam, a sign of a complex chemical process inside. This pumps the poison outside but keeps the tank clean, a balanced system. If it speeds up, the clean air might run dry. He wrote slowly in his notebook, central machine, reacting, sensors. Balances clean/toxic air. He turned to the group, his voice clear, stay back from it, it might ramp up if we trigger it. Guard the tank, that's priority. Torin looked up from the tank, his cloudy eyes flickering with worry as he watched the machine tremble harder. If it stops, will the tank keep breathing? He asked, his voice slow and shaky, his arm tightening around Mira as if the clean air might vanish any moment. Mira drew a long breath through her filter, the wheezing in her throat softer, but her gaze remained weary, her small hands gripping the cloth like a lifeline. Kalia stood, stepping closer to Ryder, her wooden stick upright, her eyes locked on the machine. The sound's changing, she said, her voice soft but sharp, pointing to a large pipe on its side where white smoke now vented faster, thicker. Like it's calling something, or warning us. She took a quick breath, grimacing as the hot gas hit her, but held her vigilance, her hand tightening on the stick, braced for trouble. Ryder frowned, studying the machine closer, noting the thrum shifting from steady to a mix of higher pitches, like metal scraping, paired with stronger tremors underfoot. Not a warning, he said, his voice low, standing and circling the machine, his hand brushing a broken panel on its side. It's signaling, could be telling them we're inside. He found a small slot in the panel, hooked his fingers in, and yanked, the metal popped off, revealing a tangle of charred wires and a tiny, dark screen, vibrating faintly as if alive. Here, he whispered, leaning closer, inhaling lightly to analyze. Hot air inside, but there's a machine oil scent, they're using this to watch. He scribbled fast, machine signal, monitoring, Seraphim aware. Suddenly, the Seraphim device in his bag buzzed hard, its red light flashing like an alarm, and the cold, deep voice crackled through the speaker again, Ryder, the machine is our eyes. Don't touch it, or the life source ends. Protect, or fail. The voice cut off, but the machine's thrum surged, white smoke pouring thicker from its pipes, fogging the room with a stifling haze. Ryder froze, his eyes widening, his chest tightening as the human tone struck again, not a machine, but a direct controller, and this was their tool. He wrote quickly, his hands shaky, human voice, machine their eyes, remote control, survival test. He turned to the group, his voice taut, they see us through this, don't break it, but don't let it win. Hold the tank, we need time. Lena gripped her spear tighter, her eyes flashing with anger and caution. Their eyes? She echoed, her voice dropping low, stepping toward the machine but halting as Ryder raised a hand. Where are they watching from? Why not show themselves? She took a short breath, turning to guard the tank, determined to keep it safe. Torin pulled Mira closer, his voice trembling, they want us dead in here? Mira looked up, her weary eyes sharp despite her frailty. If it's their eyes, can we blind it? She whispered, her voice faint but keen. Kalia nodded, her gaze fixed on the panel Ryder had opened. Blind it, or trick it, she said, her voice soft, stepping to the scrap pile and picking up a broken metal shard. But why do they need us alive? Ryder glanced at the machine, then the tank of clean air, one their watcher, the other their lifeline.